Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're really getting into the ethical side of the 2025 Alberta Teachers Strike. This was massive, 51,000 teachers, 740,000 students, 16 school days. It wasn't just about contract talks, was it? We're looking at a really deep ethical question here. Was this strike, an unfair hit on students, or did that disruption actually expose a bigger, ongoing problem?
That's the core tension, absolutely. And you can't really judge the strike itself without looking at the lead up. The sources we looked at emphasized this wasn't sudden. It was the result of years of, well, systemic choices. We have to look at the data, the actual classroom conditions, the provincial funding picture to understand the context.
Right. Let's talk about that central teacher argument then. Their working conditions are the students' learning conditions. That's what they keep saying. And the sources point to these really systemic issues, class sizes over 40 in some cases, plus increasing complexity, right? More kids with specific learning needs, different language backgrounds.
Exactly. And crucially, without the needed support staff to actually manage that complexity. It paints a picture of a system really stretched thin. And the money side of it, well, the numbers back that up pretty strongly. Alberta's spending per student, $13,494. That's the lowest in Canada.
Lowest.
Yeah, lowest. Compare that to the national average, which is $16,579. That's a pretty significant gap. And it gets worse when you look long term. Over the 10 years before the strike, enrollment in public schools shot up.
How much?
Nearly 15%, 14.8% to be exact. Fastest growth in Canada. Oh. But over that same period, real per student funding, it actually went down.
Down while enrollment went up.
Dropped by 17.5% in real dollars.
Yeah.
So you've got way more students coming in and significantly less funding per student to educate them. That's the perfect storm that teachers were talking about.
Okay, so that really puts the funding issue front and center, which leads to the ethical question. Was this underfunding, unavoidable? Was it just a matter of tight budgets overall? Because the sources we reviewed highlight some other government spending choices around that time that drew a lot of criticism.
That's a key point. You see things like, what was it, $7 million on one government ad campaign, another $8 million fighting federal environmental rules.
And the energy war room, that wasn't cheap either.
Over $66 million spent there.
Yeah.
And then there's the money for the Edmonton Oilers plaza development.
How much was that?
Over $128 million committed in public funds. Critics called it corporate welfare, especially when schools were feeling the pinch.
So it looks less like no money and more like different priorities.
And add to that, Alberta gives the highest public subsidy to private schools in the country, over $250 million annually. And they even expanded that to cover capital costs like building schools.
Right. So against that backdrop of funding choices, the strike happens. How did the government respond?
Immediately. They passed Bill 2, the Back to School Act, literally overnight.
And their justification?
They cited an undeniable moral imperative to get kids back in class.
But the way they did it raised serious ethical flags, didn't it?
Huge flags. The real bombshell was using the Notwithstanding Clause, Section 33 of the Charter, preemptively.
Explain that a bit. What does using that clause actually do?
It basically lets a government pass a law that overrides certain fundamental rights guaranteed in the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. In this case, the teachers' rights to collectively bargain and strike. And they suspended those rights not just for the moment, but until September 2028. That's why critics called it a, quote, reckless and historic abuse of power. It's a really big constitutional tool to use.
And the deal they imposed with that law, it wasn't even something new, was it?
No. That's another critical point. The legislated contract was based on a tentative deal that the teachers themselves had already voted on.
And rejected.
Overwhelmingly rejected. Nearly 90% voted against it. So the government essentially forced a contract on them that their own members had democratically refused. It completely undermined the bargaining process.
So when you weigh it all ethically, where does the analysis land?
Well, looking at the evidence presented in the sources, the argument is that the greater moral weight, the culpability, really falls on the government. Their long-term funding choices created the crisis conditions. And then their response, using the Notwithstanding Clause, forcing a rejected deal, was seen as a, well, disproportionate and democratically damaging use of state power.
So for you listening, think about it as a transfer of harm. The argument is the teachers took the invisible, sort of chronic harm of underfunding the overcrowded classes, lack of support, and made it visible. Made it acute through the strike, forcing everyone to confront the problem. It shifted the pain to make it undeniable.
Exactly. And that leads to the final thought from the sources. How do we stop this happening again? Is there a better way? They point to alternatives like binding arbitration, which some provinces like Manitoba use. A neutral third party makes a final decision if talks break down. So the question for you is, does having a final resolution process like that better protect students' and democratic rights compared to the nuclear option the government chose?
Something to think about.